treat in terms of like what they have to offer. We've heard it before and we're just so excited they're here.
My team and I are just taking advantage of ASL to have our private chat. She's just catching me up to speed for everybody here chatting.
Welcome. And do we, is it Andrea?
It is Andrea.
Andrea, now tell me your preference, because I've had friends with many pronunciations, so please.
Thank you for asking. Actually, I plain old Andrea.
Andrea, thank you. Thank you.
And the other ASL interpreter. Nice to meet you all.
A pleasure, a pleasure.
I'll go next. So my name is Mariela Paulino, and I am the founder of Private Hearing. Really, really excited to be speaking with all of you today.
Wonderful. Katarina or Tracy?
I'm Katarina. I'm also speaking today, and I'm the founder of Blindish Latina, and I'm looking forward to this.
Okay. It looks like our guests are starting to be admitted. I'm not sure why, because I'm not doing it.
I am.
No, I was waiting. That's why I was the waiting room.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyway, but we will get started any minute. Thank you all who arrived early. We were just doing a little getting prepared for your arrival. So I think we're all here. I'm just going to spotlight our speakers.
Tracy will begin interpreting. I'm going to turn my video off, and in 15 minutes, she and I will switch, just so you know.
Okay, thank you for that. Oops. So I should take you off spotlight in 15 minutes. Is that how I should do that?
If you would like to make us both a co-host, we can control our own spotlight.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
If you co-host both of us, I will spotlight myself when I start and then unspotlight Tracy, and she can do the same.
Wonderful.
So you're going to manage that, Andrea?
I can totally do that. I do not.
Perfect, because I've never done that before. Spotlight myself, turn myself off. So thank you.
As long as I have co-hosting ability, I can do that for you. Yes.
Terrific.
Awesome. Then I'll have you start. I'm going to go off.
And actually, Mariela and Katarina can let me know how you would like to handle that. You can control it or I can control it. But this is how we're going to get started. How about that? Is that?
I'm happy to hand it off or just kind of like not do anything.
Okay. All right.
Let's get this party started.
We're gonna get it started. And with that, we are recording. Thank you, Michelle. So I want to begin with a little housekeeping. You should have already seen our message to everyone in the waiting room that we are recording this event for our purposes as the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. If you require closed captioning, you can select the small white box with the 2 letters C's located on the toolbar, either at the bottom or top of your screen, and select live transcript. You are welcome to rename yourselves for identification purposes by choosing the 3 small dots or ellipses located in the upper right corner of your personal box in Zoom, and then selecting rename. At the same time, you can also add your pronouns if you so choose. We are going to mute everyone during the formal presentations except for our speakers, but you can, however, and are encouraged to use the chat to comment or post questions throughout. You can also use the emoticons to react to the speakers, also located on the toolbar at the bottom or the top of your screens. And now, without further ado, I will introduce myself. I'm Lynn Roberts. I am the Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Alumni Relations here at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy, also known as the CUNY SPH, which you see in my background. I'm an African-American, light brown-skinned female, cisgender female. I have short cropped dark brown hair with some spatterings of gray, and I am wearing glasses and a black V-neck sweater. In my background, again, you will see our logo, CUNY SPH, 5 years together, because we are celebrating our 5th year anniversary as a school. I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of our Office of Accessibility Services and Office of Student Wellness, and in partnership with the CUNY Central Office of Student Inclusive Initiatives, or OSSI. Today's event is the first in our 5-part inaugural series of events in honor of the annual CUNY Disability Awareness Month. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers, Caterina Rivera and Mariela Paulino. Their full bios will be posted in the chat, but I'll tell you a little bit about them to get us started. Mariela is a disability advocate who creates systems and tools that help people interact better with the world around them. She has worked in tech as a software developer, designer, and project manager, working at the intersections of tech and social impact initiatives that create inclusion, accessibility, and equity. She is now devoting herself full-time to her passion project, Project Hearing, and co-founding Chicas Talk Disability to share her message of accessibility and inclusion in tech. Mariela has a BA from New York University and a graduate degree from Georgetown University. Caterina is the founder of Blindish Latina, a platform smashing disability stigmas through storytelling, advocacy, and education. She is also the co-founder of Chicas Talk Disability. Caterina is a public speaker and consultant with 14 plus years of experience in the public sector. She has a BA from Duke University, her master's in education from Bank Street College of Education, and her MPH from CUNY School of Public Health at Hunter College. I also wish to introduce our interpreters for today, Tracy and Andrea. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the next portion of our program over to Caterina and Mariela. And after they finish the formal presentation, they will engage all of us with questions and answers. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean Roberts. So wait, I just realized something. So Caterina, you were at the Bank Street on 112th Street on Broadway? That's the one?
Yes, that's where
I grew up
went.
there. Okay, I just discovered something about like one of my closest friends. I didn't make the connection before. We need to talk about that. So, so I am really, really excited to talk to you today. So let's do a brief audio description before we get started. So my name is Mariela. I am a trans Hispanic woman. I am wearing box braids in my hair. I am wearing a black t-shirt that says the future is accessible in white letters. You may hear some background noise from New York City. I am wearing a black leather jacket. Behind me, there is a background that says Project Hearing in black, blue, and white letters. Caterina, do you want to do your audio description before we get started?
Sí, dale. Okay, so I'm Caterina, and I am a light-skinned Latinx woman. I have my hair half up, half down. It's dark brown. I'm wearing dangly silver earrings, glasses, and bright coral lipstick. I have a V-neck sleeveless shirt on with a blue and white pattern. And behind me, I have a virtual background with the Blindish Latina logo. It has a bold outline of an eye, and then at Blindish Latina, and it's repeated in a column format on a white background and the logo and text is Black. Now that we've done our description, which we hope that you're noticing as a best practice for accessibility, we're going to dive right in. So what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're first going to share with you some stories about our intersectional identities as disabled Latina professionals. Then we're going to talk about why is disability left out of diversity and equity initiatives. We're going to try to answer this question. Then we're going to make the case for disability inclusion. Why does it matter everywhere? And then give you some examples within higher education settings of why does it matter there. So getting right into the first topic, where we really wanted to give a moment to highlight intersectionality, what it means for us and what it means for our stories. If you are familiar with the term, put in the chat box, like, what do you think it means? Because I think that right now, so many people are using it, and that's great. It's really great that there's more awareness. Sometimes there might be some confusion over the definition. One of the most important things to know about this term is that it was created by a Black woman, and she was a professor, and I believe she's still a professor, Kimberly Crenshaw, in 1989. Intersectionality refers to the interconnected nature of identities like race, class, and gender, disability status, and how they apply to a person or a group. How do they overlap? How do they create more barriers or challenges or additional privileges? I hope that breaks it down in a way that makes sense, but we're also going to keep talking about it. Basically, when we think about intersectionality, we want to pay attention to the way that different identities overlap and what that means for someone's experience. It's a lens that we can apply, a lens of analysis. You can see where power comes and collides, where it intersects. So let's talk about us. We are disabled Latina professionals. One of the reasons that I created Blindish Latina was to talk about that and put myself out and represent, because when people that are non-disabled think about disability, there are a lot of stereotypes that are out there, and there's some ideas about what disability looks like, and they're not always correct or accurate. So by putting myself forward as Blindish Latina, I'm saying, hey, here I am, and I'm disabled. So if you didn't think that I look disabled, you got to think again. One of the things that I'm doing with public speaking and consulting is trying to create an impact so that we can see greater inclusion and accessibility and workplaces and educational institutions. So I'm going to flip it to Mariela now to talk to us about Project Hearing and her personal identity.
Thank you, Katarina. So I started Project Hearing back when I was doing my master's in Georgetown. And I started Project Hearing because I felt like we weren't having conversations around the realities of hearing loss. So we're having this conversation on Zoom, we're understanding each other. I learn new things about you. But I am still benefiting from closed captioning. When we go to a bar, like the first time we met for an event you were putting together, there were still a lot of challenges around the way we were communicating. I don't know if you remember, but I was kind of like really struggling. And I felt like we talked about disability in a way that was very much centered on either pity or inspirational porn. And I wanted to have conversations where I was able to see my disability in a way that was empowering, that was cool. Like I'm out here living my best life, and I wasn't seeing that narrative happening on social media. So I created Project Hearing because I wanted to solve that problem, the way we talk about disability, and ways that people with disabilities adapt, use technology, and move around in the world. So, our identities as Latina professionals really, really was shaped for us. For me, I want to take you back a little bit because one of the things my mom tells me is, ¿tú crees que tú naciste de caja? Which in English means, do you think you were born big? And so it's really important for us to understand, why do we think about disability the way we do? Why do we prioritize accessibility? And I want to tell you the story of when I was younger, we used to play Selena. Now, I'm not talking about Selena Gomez, like, no, we're talking Selena Quintanilla, Bidi Bidi Bam Bam. And on Sundays, my mom would just spend the whole day cleaning, and music would be playing in the background. I lost my hearing at the age of 7 after immigrating to New York City from the Dominican Republic. And as you can imagine, losing your hearing and becoming disabled in a new country when you don't know the language was something that was very, very shocking. And so my mother, my family wanted to create an environment that prioritized accessibility. So what they would do is they would have the radio. Like, this was back in the day, we didn't have iPads, we had radio. And so, and I'm not even, like, what blows my mind is that I'm not even that old. Like, I am young and we had radio like just a few decades ago. Mind blowing. Technology is amazing. We had cassettes. And what my mom would do is she would take the cassette and she would put the cassette in the radio, and then the song would play and she would hit record. And then over like hours, she and my sister would write the song by hand, so that when the song came on the radio, I could have the lyrics to sing along. Oh gosh, I don't know why I'm getting emotional about that, because I've told this story a million times, but that was the level of accessibility that I came to expect at home. And it's funny because I have like this picture of like my family right here. Oh, I don't know if you guys can see this. Like, this is me. So that's the level of accessibility I came to expect at home. And that transferred over into how I came to advocate for myself and the level of advocacy and inclusion I would expect from my education and the level of inclusion I would expect in the workplace. So going back to another thing that my mom says, todo comienza en la casa, which means it all begins at home, like that the core values and system and beliefs about yourself really begin at home. And that really shaped how I came to see inclusion as a professional. So that's kind of like the backstory to this whole movement. Thanks, Mommy. Caterina.
Thank you for that. I love when you share stories about your mom and everything she used to do for you, because I think that's the hidden life that we don't know about in the public. Like, what's happening at the family level? What does accessibility look like just for music, which is really, really interesting. For me, I was disabled from birth. My parents just didn't know it. I had hearing loss. And so when I started to become independent, they noticed that when they called my name, I couldn't hear them. And I was fitted for hearing aids at 3 or 4 years old. But they didn't know why I had a need for hearing aids until I was 17, when I was diagnosed with Usher syndrome, which is a combination of vision and hearing loss. But the vision loss presents itself later. So I found out that I was going to have a progressive vision loss at that time. And what I think is interesting for me when we're talking about intersectionality and like different parts of my identity, one thing that I was reflecting on was my love for salsa dancing. I truly love salsa dancing. I remember my family we would go to an event called Círculo Cubano, which Cuban Circle. This was in Maryland. Every New Year's, the group of Cubans would put on a party, and there would be a band with live music, and I would love to dance. But I only learned kind of like simple style salsa, not the fancy stuff at that level, just dancing with my dad, dancing with friends there. When I went to college, I wanted to learn more. It's like, I got to get into this. And I would go all the time dancing, and I loved it. And I loved just learning more. But what I also realized for myself is that dancing is a pretty accessible activity, especially when you're doing something like partner dancing, because the signals that you're getting are generally from the movement, from the touch. So even if my vision gets significantly worse later on, then it's okay. I'll still be able to dance. And I think that when on the flip side, like one of the things that I do notice now being an adult in the workplace, sometimes I feel that I can be interpreted in a negative fashion because I'm a woman and I'm speaking up. And then say I'm speaking up about my disability or something that I need, there's a stigma attached to that as well. So it's like a double penalty. Oh, she wants us to do something extra. Or she, and it's the fact that I'm a woman and someone with a disability. So that those identities sometimes seem to not intersect, and then sometimes it seems like it is very connected. So I will leave you with that. And Mariela is now going to talk to us about, why do we think disability is left out of diversity and equity initiatives?
All right, so in order for us to be able to understand the present, we really have to take a look at the past. We talk about our background and our histories, but let's actually take a step back and move away. By the way, I'm noticing that we have people who enter the waiting room. I'm not going to take care of that. You guys take care of that. Cool. All right. So in order for us to understand our lives, we have to really take a step back and move away from the personal into the history of disability, because disability is not just our individual stories. And so one of the things that we have learned is that the mainstream conversations that we are seeing happening now around disability are really the result of years, decades of work around the implementation of something that's called universal design and accessibility. These two concepts, even though they have existed for a very long period of time, are now only making mainstream news. And so this is awesome that we are doing this conversation at CUNY, no less. Like, this is how far we have come in the 30 years since the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But let's go into a little bit of detail into what that means. Conversations around accessibility have really started in the last half century. That is like 50 years old. That is younger than our moms. And the reason why that is happening is because in the last 50 years, there have been tremendous strides made in terms of medical care. During the last 50 years, we have seen growth in the way medicine is able to heal people after injury or illness. The way that I lost my hearing, I would not be here today 50 or 100 years ago because the technology did not exist. Think of the cochlear implant, which is the device that I used to hear. Let me show you guys. This only came out in like the 1980s. So I don't know, 40 years ago, if you were a person that became deaf, you would not have the ability to hear music or hear this video afterwards. So all of these technological advancements have happened in the last 50 years. We also have a lot more technology, a lot more progress, and a lot more awareness and social movements that are driving conversations about accessibility. One of the things that I really, really want to point out when we talk about the history of disability is that it was actually driven in large part by soldiers that were returning back from, I think it was the Second World War. So during the Second World War, we saw a push for curb cuts because we had a lot of veterans that were having trouble accessing physical spaces. They banded together and advocated for themselves. And we also saw the partnership across social movements. So the social movement of the 1960s, the social movements of the deaf community, all of these things created a perfect storm that created social progress and created the Americans with Disabilities Act, the first piece of federal legislation that gave rights at the federal level to people with disabilities, which now, 30 years later, allows us to be able to have companies like Zoom provide closed captioning functionality after a lawsuit so that people like me and Katerina who have hearing disabilities can have equal access. So what we are living now is history. Katerina, back to you.
I love this. I feel like we're in a newsroom, you know, we say back to you. So yes, Mariela bringing some history to the forefront. One of the things that I highly encourage you to do, if you have Netflix and you have not watched it yet, please watch Crip Camp. It is so good. And it's very, very interesting, both the part of the storytelling about the camp and what that space looked like, and also what the advocacy and the history that came out of it was. So just that's all I'm going to tell you, because I just want to leave a teaser. Back to the question of, okay, so we know about the advancement of the ADA. We know that there have been changes in what's possible for people with disabilities due to technology. Why is disability left out of diversity and equity conversations and initiative? Let's propose some more things. Ableism and stigma. These are big barriers. When we talk about what is ableism, just like all the other isms, it's damaging. Ableism is the preference for those non-disabled people, that it's an idea that they're better if they don't have a disability, and that their lives are worth more, their, you know, just everything is valued more if they don't have a disability. So when we think about this as also stigma, I've had many people tell me that they're uncomfortable with saying the word disabled. Or, you know, I just received a message on LinkedIn the other day that somebody said to me, I heard the term differently abled. Oh, and I just loved it. It's so much better. It makes me feel better. And I had to gently educate, well, actually, that is not a term that people who are disabled prefer. And this is why. This idea that disabled is not a bad word. It's not. This is still a revolutionary idea for many people in our country and society. And if you are uncomfortable with the word disability, then I'm just calling you in here and letting you know that it's not a bad word. It's a descriptive word. It's not a euphemism. It doesn't sanitize disability, which there are many cutesy euphemisms, like the one that I definitely don't like and makes me cringe is handicapable. Let's X that one out. Like that. I don't want to hear any more handicapable or whatever else people are going to come up with. But you can see that the reason for the genesis of these other terms is that there is such a stigma about disability. Also, realize that many people that have disabilities are not disclosing, are not coming out with their disability identity because of the stigma that they can anticipate from others. So that's one reason that I think that we don't see this inclusion of disability into equity and diversity initiatives. There's also, depending on the institution or the organization, whoever we're talking about, there could be a lack of commitment to inclusion. People can be focused on compliance with the ADA and creating individual accommodations. And that's a very reactionary approach where it's like, okay, I've done my duty, I've provided the accommodations, rather than being proactive and saying, how can I design for a more inclusive environment? How can I do better overall? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. In many cases, people that are organizing events or in charge of workplaces or just anything, I think that we can see that disability is sometimes seen as something that's inconvenient or causes extra work for others. It can be seen in a negative light. And really where that clash comes from is that when there are barriers that exist, when somebody with disabilities comes in and says, hey, like, I need help, people say, oh, that's extra work. But the problem is the barrier is there. If nothing is done to address the barrier, then it's not an inclusive space. And you are going to have people excluded. So then it's really about, okay, what's your commitment here? And what do you care about? There's a lot of damaging narratives in general about disability. For example, people might think that the disabled are rolling in government money and getting so many benefits. And that's actually not true. The benefit for disability is not enough to live on. And then disability itself is expensive. In many cases, people have recurring expenses that they need to spend just to have their mobility aids or have their hearing aids. For example, I shared that there are 4 levels of hearing aids, and the premium ones, depending on different price quotes, they could be between $6,000 to $7,000 a pair. And then you have to replace those every 3 to 7 years, depending how long you can hold out. And that's not even counting the upkeep and the maintenance. And that's just for hearing aids. So you don't know all the expenses associated with someone's condition. The other thing that could be happening when we talk about diversity and equity, disability is not as visible, it's not as in your face. When we look at the data, we are the largest minority group. 1 in 4 adults in the United States currently has a disability. So when we look at the data, you would think, oh, wow, this is really something that needs to be addressed in diversity and equity initiatives. But I don't think that there's a data-driven approach necessarily. It's more about what is the loudest, what's most visible. And again, there's not a desire here to say any message about like what's one thing being more important than the other. That's not the takeaway I want people to have. It's just about that this needs to be addressed too. And because people don't necessarily always disclose, companies don't know how many disabled employees they have. Newsflash, you gotta. Even if they're not telling you, you have disabled employees, and they might be working out adaptations on their own, accommodations on their own, but that's not the best practice that we want to see. So I'm going to ask you a quick true, or I think I already, Mariela, I think I spoiled our true or false, but let's do it anyway. True or false, put it in the chat. People with disabilities often do not disclose their disability due to fear of discrimination. So I want to see in the chat, true or false. People with disabilities often do not disclose their disability due to fear of discrimination. Okay, I've seen some truths. I've seen some truths. Keep on going. Put in the chat. One more second here. Okay, thank you. Yes, this is true. This is true. Studies have shown that people with disabilities fear disclosing due to discrimination. Even if they benefit from accommodations following disclosure, there's a fear of being looked at differently, which is based on reality, because discrimination is real. And there are people who, for example, disclose in a job interview and then they don't get hired, but then they don't disclose on other job interviews and they have gotten hired. So these are people's real lived experiences. Discrimination is alive and well. All right, now we're gonna move on to the case for disability inclusion. Now that we've talked about what the problems are, why it might be being left out. So Mariela, let us know.
All right, so I do want to add some comments to some of the things you said, and I was taking notes. But one of the things I want to point out in terms of why I feel a lot of ableism and stigma happens is because a lot of employers or a lot of individuals just don't know what to do. I say that because I actually had a supervisor who told me regarding a challenge I was having with my hearing disability. They said to me, you don't have to be the hero. And I said this story, but you know, when you're in the shower and you've got a good argument and you just say, oh, I should have said that, you know. And what I should have responded when that comment was said to me was, I wouldn't have to be the hero. I wouldn't have to pretend to hide my disability. I wouldn't be so afraid of asking for the accommodations I needed if only I was accommodated. My disability wouldn't be a problem if from the moment I came on board, accessibility was a part of the conversation. People with disabilities don't want to be heroes. People with disabilities just want to be able to move in the world and like live their lives like everybody else. We don't want pity. We don't want accolades for just living and breathing. We just want to be included. And I also think that in the same way we tell people that we should advocate for ourselves, we also should encourage people in positions of power to also create spaces where a person with a disability doesn't have to, we talk about this word, advocate. So we just need to make sure that we create those types of spaces. Also, disclosing is incredibly hard. And I want to really, really drive that point home because I just had a conversation with one of my best friends a while ago. She has a hearing disability, which does eat into her budget, and she's about to move in with her partner. And her partner didn't know about these expenses that she was having regarding her disability and was expecting her to pay the same amount of money, not knowing she has this additional expense. And I told her, you need to talk to your partner. This is an important issue. Like this is, if this is somebody that you're going to be having a relationship with, you need to be honest. And if he loves you, he will understand. And she did that and it changed everything. So making sure that you also have the support system that is going to be there if you disclose so that you are not going to be discriminated against is so important. It's not just the person with the disability that is responsible for disclosing. It's also people in positions of power and influence who are responsible for creating accessible spaces. But anyway, let's go back into the case for disability and inclusion. Why does accessibility and inclusion matter? It matters because when you are able to design for accessibility, when you are able to design for inclusion, you are able to design for everybody. Some of the best practices that we've done during this workshop are already our testament to the commitment that CUNY has for creating accessible spaces, audio description, real-time captioner, interpreter. These are all things that we are putting together for this presentation, regardless of who is in the audience. It prioritizes the inclusion of everybody, and we do it from the beginning without having to accommodate and rush for services at the last minute. It's the same thing that's happened with physical spaces, with curb cuts. When you make a curb cut, which is that small ramp between blocks in New York City, You are designing not just for someone with a disability, but you're also designing for the elderly. You're designing for someone in a stroller. You're designing for your future self 40 years from now. And so that is really the concept of designing for everybody from the beginning. It is also very, very important, as Katerina mentioned earlier, that not everybody discloses their disability. So by accommodating accessibility from the very beginning, we are able to make sure that we accommodate everyone, and by adopting best practices, we are proactive instead of reactive. And all of these are examples of the work we can do to design for accessibility and inclusion, and disability inclusion, and the case for it. Now, I do have a question for all of you in the audience, which is, what other best practices are available that you are aware that can make a difference for disability inclusion? Aside from some of the ones I've mentioned, if you can think of any. Well, we don't have any new, I think I've covered everything. There we go. Large print, that's right. Excellent answer, Dean Roberts. So I'll talk about large print, for example, just to point it out. Being able to give your users the ability to have access to large text font makes a huge difference. Imagine my grandma, for example. My grandma is in her 80s. I would love to have her see me on this Zoom call. She would be all hyped up about it. She'll probably struggle with the language barrier, but she'll probably have a hard time reading the captions on the chat. Zoom, however, doesn't have that functionality, but other platforms, I think like Microsoft Teams may. But that's a really great example of how we can incorporate user design best practices in design. Now, one of the things I really want to drive home when talking about the case for disability and inclusion is that all of us have the power. So it's kind of like that comic, you have the power. It's kind of like Captain Planet, you have the power. So it is really important for all of us to remember that we need to do what we can where we are with what you have. If you are a content creator, make sure that you're captioning your videos. If you're an event planner, make sure that you bring accessibility educators like Katerina and I to your events so that you can prioritize accessibility. If you're a hiring manager, make sure that you're interviewing people with disabilities for roles. So do what you can where you are with what you have for disability inclusion. Next, Katerina is going to talk about educational settings and the case for disability inclusion.
Yes, and I love that. Thank you everyone for the suggestions. I saw some other inclusion practices in the chat. So let's talk about disability inclusion in educational settings. And this is something we really wanted to bring to the forefront of this conversation for CUNY. Disability inclusion helps both the non-disabled and disabled. Remember that some disabilities are not diagnosed until later. And people don't find out, for example, ADHD is often diagnosed much later in women. I have a friend personally that she not find out that she had ADHD until she was 30 or 31. And it completely changed the way that she looked at how she works and how she learns and all of these things. So thinking about who you have in a classroom at this level, you might have people that think differently, that have different approaches or need different supports in the learning environment. So just building that in and creating more accessible classrooms will help everybody. Designing in education that to be inclusive will yield better performance by students. Everyone will learn more easily and retain information. Creating inclusive environments promotes trust and community, which is really important in making people feel welcome in the classroom, absorb the material better, and also just support students in showing up more authentically. This is really important because say that you're an instructor of a classroom. You might design what you think is very inclusive. And if you create an environment of trust and community, your students will feel comfortable to come to you and give you feedback, because there might be something that you're not thinking of, or there might be a challenge that they're experiencing that you can address and add on to what you're already doing. But by demonstrating that commitment to inclusion from the beginning, you're going to have a better outcome overall. Right now, the students in higher education right now are our next leaders in the workforce. And the more that they can learn about inclusion now, the more this commitment can be built at this level, the better it will be for the workforce. Not just for a moral, beautiful workplace that's inclusive. It's also been shown that companies that are diverse and inclusive perform better, have more profits. So what's not to like about that from a company perspective? There also is a moral and social responsibility. If we don't create the future that we want, we must endure the future that we get. So let's actively build the inclusive future. Mariela.
Yes, I love that quote. I love that quote. I feel like it sounds really familiar. But anyway, yes, if we don't create the future we want, we must endure the future we get. COVID-19 has really put into focus all of the challenges around disability and inclusion. I mean, just getting to this point where Zoom is providing free closed captioning, Google Meet is providing free closed captioning, digital spaces are finally becoming more common. It took a global pandemic to get us here. And while that is terrible, it's also been really, really impactful. And I'm really excited to see the ways that we continue to change technology, to improve the technology, to have more conversations, and to continue to bring conversations around disability to the mainstream. So I am really, really excited for the future that we are going to be creating together. And then finally, we have one last thing to share with you all.
Yes, so just to emphasize that the time is now. The other thing to mention about COVID-19 is that unfortunately, people that are experiencing long COVID with continuous effects on their health, they're also joining the disabled community. So the numbers are unfortunately going to grow. The time is now really to pay greater attention to disability and inclusion. The other thing that we wanted to leave you with is that, as you may know, accommodations are required by law, by the ADA. Reasonable accommodations are required by law, but we hope compliance is not the main driver of actions. The disabled are everywhere. We are everywhere. We are your friends. We are your neighbors. We are your colleagues. And inclusion is the right thing to do. If you're not already committed, we hope we've given you some new things to think about and that you will join. I feel like we're signing people up. Join the movement. But yes, join the movement. And we have just a few things that we wanted to invite you to do now. We invite you to follow Blindish Latina and Project Hearing on Instagram and connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Our links were shared earlier in the chat, but if you need them again, we can share them. Feel free to invite us to speak together or separately, as we both have our own different areas of expertise. And we are actually writing a book together. Mariela and I are putting out a book later this year about tools for those with hearing loss. We're really excited about it. And so I think we're going to grab a link for our newsletter. So if you want to know when the book drops, you can be a part of our newsletter. And I want to just highlight something that Mariela is doing. Last year, she created a hearing access and inclusion conference, which was incredible. It had big name sponsors, lots of great speakers. It was completely virtual and accessible. And they're planning another one for this July. So definitely join that. Okay, and Mariela also has on our website t-shirts and swag bags. So anything else that I missed, Mariela?
No, right now, just a reminder for the newsletter, we're going to be sending that information to Dean Roberts. Make sure that you follow that. And then also I want to drop off some information for the t-shirt that I have. It says the future is accessible. All of the funding that we're doing is going to be for the conference that we are hosting this summer for the Americans with Disabilities Act 31st anniversary. We have a team of 11 people working on this. I mean, it's brilliant how people saw an idea and said, yes, we want to be a part of this movement. Blows my mind. But really, really honored to be a part of this. And with that said, back to you, Dean Roberts.
And thank you for having us speak today. We're very honored to be able to share this message. We look forward to all the questions that you have for us.
Yes.
Oh, thank you both so very much. And I hope everyone joins me in just a gracious round of applause for all the wisdom you shared with us. Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you. I can't thank you both enough. This is the second time that Caterina Rivera at Blindish Latina joined us. So thrilled to have finally met Mariela Paulino here in Zoom, and hope that we get to meet in other ways again many times over. Chicas Talk Disability, check them out, and also their respective at Blindish Latina and Project Hearing. And I also want to thank our interpreters for today, Andrea and Tracy. Thank you so much for being with us. I also have to thank my co-planners of this event, Jeanette Rodriguez and Sherry Adams, who had to leave a little early to host her support group this afternoon. But thank everyone who came out this afternoon. As was mentioned, the recording will be posted on the CUNY SPH YouTube channel and shared with all attendees. We hope you will also join us this Friday, April 16th, for the film that Caterina mentioned, Crip Cramp, Disability Revolution. We're also going to host another screening of several short films on a range of topics related to our theme for this series of events of intersectionality, inclusion, and moving away from invisibility. And we will also have a panel later this month and close out with the screening of another film, some light fare comedy. We thought we'd end on a humorous note, if you will, with a film called Give Me Liberty. So we have a lot packed into the month of April, and this was a wonderful way to kick it all off. The link was posted earlier for you to RSVP, but we'll also send it to you for all of the upcoming events. And so glad that you were able to join us. It's been a real growth experience for me individually, and I think for our school collectively to have you with us and pushing us forward to be more accessible and inclusive and just more powerful in this moment. So again, I can't thank you enough. If there are any questions with the
I'm Joanne Joyne. I just want to know, are we going to get some type of verification that we attended the workshop? Because we do need it for our professional development in the counseling center, and I work with people with disabilities. I know you're going to do the recording, which I'll get that, but is there anything else you can give in writing?
If you request it, yes, you can. I'll leave my email in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
And the information has been very helpful. I didn't know that the hearing had come this far, so it was good that I was on this workshop today. Thank you. Thank you all for providing that information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I just want to point out that to me it's interesting because both Katarina and I have special connections to CUNY. So Katarina did her master's from CUNY. And I also just finished a contract with CUNY in December of 2020. So this is kind of like coming full circle, at least for me. I don't know about you, Katarina.
Yes, I love coming back. They're not going to get rid of me.
Not going to let her go. And I have to say, having had Katarina also as a student during her time pursuing her master's, you know, that's where a lot of my education on this topic, you know, expanded tremendously. So I want to thank you even for the education you did way back then. Maybe not that way back, but.
Dean Roberts, I have to ask though, I absolutely love all the best practices that I've seen for today's event. I mean, from the audio description, the captioning, the ASL interpreting, is there a guide that you go by to inform you on all the best practices you should be doing and how to set them up for a virtual event?
You know, I haven't consulted a specific guide, but I have been paying close attention. I go to a lot of events where I think you're right that so much evolved during COVID, you know, that didn't even exist a year ago,
100%.
6 months ago, right? And so that has improved what we're able to experience. But I know that, as you said, higher ed was transformed by it. Even if we were already teaching online, we probably didn't have access to some of the functioning. You know, many institutions were, you know, compelled to do it because they were providing it for more of their students, but we had students already with those needs. So it's been really interesting as again, this has evolved, and it's a shame that it takes crises, but that seems to be how a lot of social change happens. As many know, I also teach community organizing, so we talk about that a lot in my classes. And I think as we do more of that, I think it's some of the subtleties that also have to go along with it, right? So we can have the technology, and I know, you know, this is, you know, your area, that we also need to, you know, tune into, you know, that trust that you said comes from as you provide that and sustaining that trust. So not just doing it because, you know, we ask people before the event whether they need accommodations. Everyone said no, but that's not a reason not to provide it, and how much better it makes it for everyone. I like closed captions for a lot of reasons beyond, you know, my, you know, progressively, you know, worse vision, but I think it's also being able to listen and grow. The language, the use of language that Katarina spoke about earlier has been a real opener. I remember when I first heard people saying differently able, then I thought it was an improvement. And then I had to be checked on that. And, you know, this idea of people first language as opposed to identity first language, which, you know, I think we'll explore more in depth as you know, as we go through this series. And I have to shout out that there are events happening throughout CUNY, you know, that are sponsored by central office and by the Coalition for Students with Disabilities. Did I get that right, Jeanette? The CUNY Coalition for Students with Disabilities, as CCSD, you know, are really, I know they've been doing it for years, but it seems like there's just, you know, it keeps expanding and growing.
Awesome.
Any other questions? We have just 2 minutes left.
No questions from me, but just want to say thank you again. You both motivate me so much to want to do better in the Office of Accessibility Services and just in general, even at home. You know, you spoke about home, it starts in the home. And so to be more aware of my neighbors and just everyone. So thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, my name's Tony Ann. I actually have a question, if that's okay.
Absolutely, Tony Ann, welcome.
Thank you. So thank you guys for being here. This was this was awesome. I enjoyed your presentation a lot. Now, as you guys said, studies have shown that people with disabilities fear disclosing their disability status. What advice would you give to those people who are afraid to disclose, but maybe feel that need to do so?
I'd like to start on this one. Thank you for the question. First of all, this is a real question that people are having in their lives on a daily basis. I think it depends on the context, and I think it depends on whether you feel safe to disclose. I don't think that a disabled person should disclose in all situations. I think that's a very personal choice. I also recognize that people are on a disability journey, and sometimes you're not ready to disclose. Maybe you're not proud of your disability yet. Maybe someone is struggling with their disability. And so I just want everyone to give themselves space and grace, no matter what's holding them back. Now, if you're in the employment process and you're applying for jobs, I have received advice from attorneys to not disclose disabilities in the job application process, only disclose after you get the job. And this, of course, only applies to people who have disabilities that can be hidden. They're not visible. And that it's because of the discrimination that exists. Now, it's not the ideal advice that I love to give. It's just based on what has happened in their experience. So I would say that if someone's in an environment where they don't feel safe to disclose, that they shouldn't force themselves to do so. But if it's their own barrier, I hope that they get to a place where they feel comfortable. And one of the best things they can do is talk to other people with disabilities and get that sense of community and support on their journey.
Wow, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. What a wonderful question.
I want to add to that, if I may.
Oh, sure.
So one of the things, I wrote an article about this question a few weeks ago, and one of the things I wish somebody had told me when I was younger is know your worth. Know your worth. And I say that because I've said this story before, which is that I once had a supervisor who told me if she had known that I had a hearing disability, she wouldn't have hired me because I requested a few $1,000s in accommodations for real-time captioner because AI generated captioning that came out like last year. So like just a few years ago, if you needed captioning at work for your hearing disability, you needed an interpreter to type. That service costs anywhere from $120 to $150 an hour. And so I had asked for a small portion. I mean, this company had enough money. I had asked for about $1,000 or $2,000 set aside for the year so that when we had meetings and events, I could be accommodated. So I got this job and I was told if we had known that you had a disability and that you needed accommodations, we would not have hired you. And that was a traumatic thing for me because it made me think it made me think about how my job, how when I'm applying for a job, I could be discriminated against without even knowing about it and without my hearing disability having anything to do with the job. So one of the things that I began to tell myself is know your worth. I don't want to be merely tolerated in a job. I want to be accepted. I want to be included. And sometimes that means that I will have to work in some types of environments and not others. And that's okay because I want to be in a space where my hearing disability is not something that I'm going to have to minimize or hide. It's something that's a part of my identity. I wake up a deaf person, I go to bed a deaf person. I cannot turn it on and off. And so it's really important to be in a workplace where you feel like you are going to be included. So know your worth and aim to be accepted, not tolerated.
My name is Joanne Joyner.
Yeah,
I have a question. When you're applying for jobs, do you research the companies that you want to work for? to see if they have the type of accommodations? I'm asking this because I want to give this information to my students that is in my class.
So dear members, if you prefer, we can give out our email and people can follow up with us via email. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for that question, Joanna. Really important. And sadly, we are out of time and over time, but it's obviously a conversation to be continued. So I look forward to that. And again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for our speakers, our interpreters, our wonderful attendees. Thank you all for being here.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Bye. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
And anyone who wants information from the chat, you can save it if you're still here.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna get those t-shirts.
Yeah, I'm going to get mine.
I'm gonna work on
For
that.
sure.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Jeanette. We'll talk later.